So, you probably don't think about spoons very often. They're just there, in the drawer, waiting to stir your tea or scoop some soup. But if you lived in the Middle Ages, a spoon wasn't simply a piece of cutlery. It was a sign of culture, of craft, and sometimes even of wealth. Imagine sitting in a candlelit hall, wooden beams above your head, the fire crackling at the far end, servants moving quietly with trenchers of bread and bowls of stew. And on the table before you, not a shiny stainless steel spoon like today, but maybe a carved wooden spoon, smooth from years of use, or perhaps a little pewter one if you were lucky. The spoon is such a simple object, yet it carries a very long story. And the Middle Ages were a time when spoons came in many shapes, sizes, and materials, each with its own meaning. Now, the very word spoon comes from the Old English spawn, which meant a chip of wood, a sliver carved from a larger piece. And indeed, the earliest spoons in medieval Europe were wooden, shaped out of hornbeam, boxwood, or sometimes fruit trees like apple or pear. They were light, cheap, and easy to make, but also easy to wear down. The tip would soften in the broth, or split if left too long in hot pottage. But wooden spoons had a certain warmth to them. People passed them down. A mother might carve one for her child, or a husband might whittle one for his wife. They were personal, almost intimate objects. Of course, not everyone wanted wood. If you had a little more coin, pewter spoons were common across medieval towns. Pewter was a tin-based alloy, softer than silver, duller in shine, but serviceable and respectable. Many city dwellers in the 13th and 14th centuries had a pewter spoon tucked into their belongings. Sometimes they even carried them on their belt, tied by a leather strap, ready to use at feasts or inns. And then, for the very wealthy, there were silver spoons, bright, gleaming, carefully hallmarked. In fact, in London by the 14th century, silversmiths were already regulating the quality of spoons. Some were engraved with saints, others with little inscriptions. A silver spoon was not just a tool. It was a status symbol, a reminder that you belonged to the upper circles of society. Think for a moment of how strange that must feel. A spoon today is so common, but back then, owning a finely crafted spoon could tell others about your rank. It was a little badge of respectability, polished and shining on your table. And the shapes, too, varied. The bowls of medieval spoons were often more pointed than the rounded ones we know today. They were meant to pierce into thick stews and broths. Spoons with round bowls were rarer in early centuries, though they became more common later. The handles could be plain or carved with little terminals, animal heads, acorns, or even tiny human figures. Now, you might be wondering, what about horn spoons? Ah, yes. Horn was another material widely used, especially in Northern Europe where cattle were plentiful. Horn spoons were smooth and translucent, almost like glass when polished. And though they bent easily under heat, they had a certain elegance. Some monasteries even issued horn spoons to their monks, cheap, practical, and humble. Already you can see, just in this one simple object, the Middle Ages gave us layers of social meaning. A peasant with a plain wooden spoon, a town burgher with pewter, a noble with silver, and perhaps a monk with horn. Each person lifting the same gesture to the lips, but with a tool that reflected their place in the world. And so, in this lecture, we'll wander slowly through these many kinds of medieval spoons: wooden, pewter, horn, silver, and even the rare gold or relic spoons kept in churches. We'll look at how they were made, how they were used, and the little stories they carried with them. It's not a subject that will keep you awake at night, but perhaps that is the point. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's continue our journey through the humble world of medieval spoons. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often imagine knights in armor, castles, and great battles. But everyday life was made of simpler things, and few objects were more humble, more constant than the wooden spoon. The wooden spoon was, in many ways, the spoon of the people. It was inexpensive to make, and almost anyone with a little skill and a small knife could carve one. Children sometimes whittled them as practice. Farmers carved them during the long winter evenings, and woodworkers sold them by the bundle in the markets of towns. The wood most often chosen was hard and fine-grained. Boxwood, for instance, was prized because it didn't splinter easily. Fruit woods like apple and pear were also common, since they were available when old orchards were cut back. Beech and hornbeam were reliable. Elm, too, though its twisting grain made carving a challenge. A typical medieval wooden spoon had a narrow, slightly pointed bowl, and a handle that was either straight or gently curved. There was little ornament, unless the maker wanted to leave a small carved notch at the end, a sort of maker's mark. Some were small, suited for children, others larger, for dipping into thick soups or porridge. Now, one of the most fascinating things about these wooden spoons is how personal they were. In many households, each member had their own spoon, kept for them and them alone. Imagine a family seated around a rough wooden board, each with their trencher of bread and bowl of pottage, and beside it, their own spoon. Perhaps a little nicked at the edges, perhaps a little darker from years of broth and stew, but theirs familiar to the touch. Travelers sometimes carried a spoon tucked into their pouch or tied to a belt. Inns did not always provide cutlery. A traveler would arrive, sit down, and bring out his own spoon, dipping into whatever meal was served. There's a certain coziness in that image, the idea of wandering with your own little tool, shaped by your hand, faithful and simple. And let's not forget, the spoon was not just for eating, it was also for stirring. Mothers stirred milk over the hearth with spoons. Herbal mixtures for remedies were mixed in small wooden bowls with wooden spoons. Even ink for scribes could be stirred with a little wooden stick shaped like a spoon. The object crossed the line between kitchen and workshop, between food and craft. But wooden spoons had their weakness. They wore out quickly. They absorbed flavors. A spoon left too long in hot broth might soften, even crack. If not cared for, it would split along the grain. And so, wooden spoons were plentiful, but rarely lasting for generations. They were meant for use, for daily life, and eventually they were discarded, replaced by another, fresh carved from the same tree or its neighbor. Still, there are accounts of wooden spoons that became keepsakes. A pilgrim might carve one on the road and bring it home. A husband might gift one to his wife, the handle shaped into a heart or a flower. In some parts of Europe, the idea of giving a carved spoon as a token of affection lived on. A simple, quiet expression of love, practical and personal at the same time. It's worth pausing to imagine the texture of eating with a wooden spoon. The feel of it against the lips was softer, warmer than metal. It did not clink against the bowl, but made a duller, gentler sound. Perhaps that, too, made meals more comforting in their way. A wooden spoon had a sort of silence, unlike the harder metallic spoons that rang out when set down. And though wooden spoons were common, they were not considered poor or shameful. They were simply what most people used. A good wooden spoon was valued, cared for, and sometimes kept in a pouch or wrapped in cloth to prevent damage. In some households, the spoons might even be hung up on pegs along the wall, a row of smooth little tools, each waiting for the next meal. Archaeologists have found countless fragments of medieval wooden spoons. Often, the bowls are worn thin, the handles broken away. In the damp earth of old towns, the wood softens, blackens, and eventually crumbles. But enough remain for us to glimpse their shapes, simple, elegant in their own way. The everyday spoon was a companion to the medieval diet. And what was that diet? Thick pottages of grains, beans, peas, sometimes flavored with a bit of pork fat or a few herbs. A wooden spoon dipped into such a dish day after day, morning and evening, and so the spoon absorbed not only the broth, but also the rhythm of medieval life. Think of the long winter nights, when families gathered around the hearth, the only warmth in the home. A pot bubbled with cabbage and barley. The children, hungry, reached for their spoons, and the parents, weary from the fields, did the same. The wooden spoon passed from hand to hand, mouth to mouth, life to life, until at last it wore away. It's not a glamorous story, but it is, perhaps, the most human. The wooden spoon was the spoon of memory, of daily life, of all the unnamed people who lived and died in the centuries between kings and wars. Their spoons never made it into chronicles, but they shaped every meal, every comfort, every humble supper of bread and broth. And so, when we speak of medieval spoons, we begin with wood, because wood was where it all began, and wood is what most people knew. In our next part, we'll step into a slightly wealthier world, the world of pewter spoons, shining dull gray, heavier in the hand, and more durable than wood. As towns grew across medieval Europe, and trade brought more goods into the markets, the spoon began to change. Wood was still common, but more and more people, especially in bustling towns, reached for pewter. Pewter, that gray, soft metal, an alloy of tin mixed with a little copper and sometimes lead in the earliest days. It wasn't as brilliant as silver, but it was smoother and sturdier than wood. A pewter spoon could last years, even decades if cared for. In the streets of London, Paris, Cologne, Bruges, pewterers had their guilds, busy workshops where the molten metal was poured into molds, hammered, polished, and shaped into spoons. By the 14th century, the craft was regulated. The quality of pewter was inspected, so that townsfolk could buy with confidence. The design of pewter spoons was a little different from the wooden ones. The bowls often came to a point, useful for dipping into thick stews or scooping up a chunk of meat from broth. The handles were slender, sometimes with a little knob at the end, a rounded or shaped terminal that gave the spoon character. Some knops were acorn-shaped, others were little balls. A few were flat and disc-like. Now, pewter spoons were not cheap, but they were not impossibly expensive either. A prosperous craftsman, a merchant, or even a well-off servant might afford one. They became, in a way, a mark of respectability. If you owned a pewter spoon, you were doing all right in the world. Imagine a merchant's table in the 14th century. The family gathered after a day of trade. Pewter spoons clink softly against earthenware bowls, the candlelight catching the dull gleam of the metal. It was not as rich as silver, not as humble as wood, but somewhere in between. There was also a certain pride in ownership. People often carried their pewter spoons with them, tied to their belt or wrapped in cloth when traveling. At inns where cutlery was not always provided, a pewter spoon marked you as someone who cared about propriety, about cleanliness, about good manners. And pewter spoons carried stories too. A young apprentice might be given one when he finished his training. A bride might receive a pair when she married. They were gifts that combined utility with symbolism. The durability of pewter also meant they sometimes outlasted their owners. Archaeologists have unearthed pewter spoons from medieval graves, buried with the dead as part of their worldly possessions. Perhaps it was thought that in the next life, a person might still need a spoon to eat, to share in the great heavenly banquet. But pewter was not without its faults. Early pewter often contained lead, which, as we now know, was not the healthiest of ingredients. Long exposure could leach lead into food, and so, over time, pewterers worked to refine their alloys, adding more tin, less lead, making safer, brighter spoons. In England, pewter spoons became so common by the late Middle Ages that they even entered into law. Guilds insisted on stamps and hallmarks to prove a spoon was made of true pewter, not some inferior, dangerous mixture. Buyers wanted assurance that what touched their lips was sound, reliable. And yet, even with their regulation, pewter spoons carried the weight of everyday life. They were passed down, patched when bent, polished when tarnished. The surface darkened with age, but a little rubbing with sand or ash could bring back the shine. What strikes me most about pewter spoons is how they sat right in the middle of society. Not poor, not rich, but modest, respectable, steady. They were the spoons of the townsfolk, of bakers, weavers, merchants, clerks, the people who made medieval towns hum with daily life. Picture the guild hall after a long day, tables filled with men sharing ale and stew. Each dips his pewter spoon into the communal pot. The firelight dances on the dull metal, and there is a sense of belonging, of community, that no silver or gold spoon could quite replace. And so, pewter spoons remind us of the solid middle, the sturdy backbone of medieval Europe. They fed not just the stomachs, but the sense of identity for townsfolk who built the cities we still walk today. Next, we'll leave the towns behind for a moment and step into the monasteries and cloisters, where another kind of spoon was favored, translucent, smooth, and quietly beautiful, the humble horn spoon. If wooden spoons belonged to the peasant and pewter spoons to the townsfolk, then horn spoons were something in between, practical, humble, but with a certain quiet beauty. Horn spoons were made from the horns of cattle, a material that was surprisingly versatile in the Middle Ages. Horn could be softened in hot water, cut, pressed, and polished until it became almost translucent. Pale amber, smoky brown, sometimes streaked with darker veins. A horn spoon caught the light in a way that wood never could. In Northern Europe especially, where cattle were plentiful, horn was used for many things: combs, buttons, drinking cups, and, of course, spoons. A single large ox horn could yield several spoons, carved and shaped by patient hands. The result was smooth, glossy, and gentle on the lips. Monasteries were especially fond of horn spoons. They were inexpensive, durable, and had a certain plainness that suited the monastic life. A monk, seated in a refectory hall, head bowed, silence observed, would lift a horn spoon to his mouth, dipping into simple vegetable stew or thin porridge. The spoon reflected the ideals of humility and modest living. Yet horn spoons were not only for monks. They found their way into households across northern and central Europe. They were lighter than metal, less prone to splinter than wood, and they offered a pleasant smoothness that made eating more comfortable. What is fascinating is that horn spoons could be worked into different forms. Some were small and delicate for soft foods, others broader with long handles used for stirring. There are even records of horn ladles, larger versions used to serve soup from communal pots, and while horn spoons were practical, they could also be beautiful. Skilled craftsmen sometimes polished them until they shone like glass. The natural colors of horn, swirling from honey yellow to dark brown, gave each spoon a unique character. No two were ever quite alike. But horn had its weaknesses too. It bent under heat. It could warp if left too long in boiling broth, and over time it became brittle, cracking along the grain. Still, while it lasted, it offered a sense of refinement without the cost of metal. Travelers often carried horn spoons as well. They were light to pack, and if one was lost or broken, another could be easily obtained in the next market town. Horn spoons were, in a way, the spoon of the road, serving pilgrims, wanderers, and merchants alike. And there is something oddly poetic about horn spoons. They were born from the living beast, reshaped after death into something useful, something close to daily life. In a world where little went to waste, horn gave one more gift, a small tool to nourish the body day after day. Imagine sitting in a quiet cloister garden. The evening bells have rung. A monk ladles broth into a wooden bowl, lifts his horn spoon, smooth and faintly glowing in the fading light. There is no grandeur, only silence, simplicity, and the small comfort of a humble meal. Horn spoons may not be as famous as silver or gold, but in their quiet way, they remind us of the values of the medieval world: simplicity, thrift, and the art of turning what nature gave into something enduring. And now, having lingered among wood, pewter, and horn, it is time to step upward into the halls of nobility, where spoons were not just tools, but treasures. Gleaming silver, sometimes gilded with gold, adorned with saints and symbols, we've lingered with wood, pewter, and horn, the spoons of ordinary life. But now, let us move upward to the shining tables of the nobility, where spoons were no longer humble tools, but dazzling objects of wealth and ceremony. Silver spoons were the pride of the medieval aristocracy. In a time when silver was counted carefully, measured, and weighed, to own even a small spoon made of the pure metal was a mark of status. They gleamed in the firelight of great halls, polished until they reflected faces like tiny mirrors. In England, as early as the 13th century, records speak of silver spoons. Some were gifts to brides, others were treasured heirlooms passed down from parent to child. And by the 14th century, the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths in London was already stamping and testing silver, ensuring that a noble's spoon carried proper marks of quality. But it wasn't just about shine. Many silver spoons were decorated. The handles often ended in what were called knops, elaborate terminals, shaped like acorns, lions, or miniature figures of saints. One famous style was the apostle spoon, where the knot was carved as one of the 12 apostles, sometimes even Christ himself. To own a set of 12, each representing a different saint, was the height of pious wealth. These spoons were not for everyday porridge. They were for feasts, for ceremonies, for occasions where display mattered. At a great banquet, nobles and bishops might sit side by side, lifting silver spoons from silver bowls, the table gleaming with wealth as much as with candlelight. And sometimes, spoons were gilded, a thin layer of gold applied to silver, creating an object that seemed to glow, warm and rich in the light of the hall. A gilded spoon could catch the eye more than a simple goblet because it was so intimate, so close to the lips. There were even spoons made entirely of gold, though these were rare and usually ceremonial. Kings and queens might receive them as coronation gifts, or churches might hold them as part of their treasures. A golden spoon was not meant for soup. It was a symbol of authority, of divine favor, of wealth beyond measure. Now, silver spoons carried meaning beyond the table. They were gifts at baptisms, given to infants of wealthy families as a sign of fortune. This is where the phrase, "born with a silver spoon in one's mouth," comes from. It meant not that the child literally tasted silver, but that they entered the world with wealth already in hand. Such spoons often carried engravings, initials, coats of arms, or religious symbols. They were meant to be both practical and commemorative, reminding the owner not only of their family's wealth, but also of their lineage, their place in the world. Silver spoons also traveled. Nobles on pilgrimage sometimes carried them, not only for eating, but as portable wealth. If money ran short, a spoon could be sold or pledged for coin. In a world without banks as we know them, silver spoons were, in a sense, pockets of security. And what of the experience of eating with a silver spoon? Different from wood, from pewter, from horn. Silver was cool against the lips, smooth and unyielding. It did not absorb flavors. It rang lightly when set down. To use a silver spoon was to feel permanence, a sense of something beyond the fleeting meal. Archaeologists sometimes find these spoons in hoards, buried during times of war or plague, kept safe by anxious hands, only to be left behind as their owners never returned. Each spoon carries a story of wealth, of fear, of longing. So when we imagine the noble's table, picture not only the roasted meats, the wines, the fruits, but also the glittering array of spoons, each a tiny masterpiece, each a whisper of status, faith, and wealth. But silver spoons were not the end of the story. For beyond the halls of nobles and kings, there were spoons tied to the sacred, spoons kept in churches and monasteries, used not for porridge or pottage, but for holy rituals. Relic spoons, imbued with meanings far deeper than hunger. By now, we've wandered through the spoons of peasants and merchants, through the gleam of silver at noble tables. But in the Middle Ages, there was another world entirely, the world of the church. And here, too, spoons had their place. A spoon in a monastery refectory might be humble, a horn spoon, plain and serviceable. But within the church itself, spoons could be sacred. They were not meant for stew or pottage, but for holy rituals. In liturgy, spoons were used in many ways. In the Orthodox tradition, a small spoon, often silver or gilded, was used to administer the Eucharist, placing both bread and wine into the mouths of the faithful. In Western Europe, there were also liturgical spoons, sometimes used to measure wine, water, or incense during Mass. these were not everyday spoons. They were crafted with reverence, handles adorned with crosses, bowls engraved with sacred symbols. They might be kept in reliquaries, alongside chalices and patens, as part of the church treasury. Some churches even held the spoons as relics, objects believed to have touched the saints, or to carry miraculous power. A silver spoon said to belong to an apostle, or to have been used by a holy figure. Such relics might be displayed on feast days, kissed by pilgrims, treasured as windows into the divine. And there were ceremonial spoons connected to kingship itself. In England, the coronation of monarchs involved a special golden spoon, used to anoint the sovereign with holy oil. That very spoon, surviving through centuries of war and upheaval, is still part of the crown jewels today. Its shape is simple, its bowl long and narrow, but its meaning immense. It carried the belief that the king ruled not only by power, but by sacred right. What strikes me about these spoons is how they blurred the line between the ordinary and the sacred. A spoon is, at its heart, a tool for feeding. But in the church, it became a tool for grace. Instead of nourishing the body, it nourished the soul. Imagine a candle-lit chapel, incense curling in the air. A priest lifts a small silver spoon, dips it into a chalice, and places the Eucharist onto the tongue of a kneeling believer. In that moment, the humble spoon becomes a bridge between heaven and earth. It's easy to forget, when we think of medieval religion, how much everyday objects were transformed by faith. A spoon could be a relic, a blessing, a symbol of holy authority. It was no longer just metal or wood, but something touched by the sacred. And sometimes these sacred spoons inspired copies. Wealthy patrons might commission apostle spoons for their own tables, imitating the church's relics, turning faith into fashion. And so, the influence of the sacred spoon reached beyond the altar, into the homes of the devout and the powerful. If the wooden spoon was the spoon of hunger, the pewter spoon the spoon of respectability, the silver spoon the spoon of wealth, then the sacred spoon was the spoon of meaning, carrying with it a weight far greater than its size. As we drift forward, we'll leave the sacred halls and return once more to the wider medieval world, where spoons could surprise us in their variety. From spoons carved with charms to ward off evil, to spoons given as love tokens, or crafted as keepsakes. We've seen spoons at the hearth, in the market, on noble tables, even in sacred rituals. But spoons also carried meanings beyond eating and ceremony. They became symbols, tokens of love, even objects of superstition. One of the most charming traditions of the later Middle Ages was the giving of spoons as gifts. We've already spoken of baptism spoons, where wealthy godparents might give a silver spoon to an infant, a promise of fortune and care. But there were also spoons exchanged at weddings. A groom might present his bride with a carved wooden spoon, its handle shaped like a heart or a flower. Not merely a utensil, but a token of affection. In some regions, this tradition grew into what we know as love spoons, elaborately carved wooden spoons decorated with knots, hearts, or chains. They said, without words, "I have taken time to shape this for you, to craft something both useful and beautiful, and to place my care into your hands." The idea survived well beyond the Middle Ages, especially in Wales, where love spoons became a celebrated custom. Superstitions gathered around spoons as well. A broken spoon might be a sign of bad luck. A missing spoon in a household could mean a visitor was coming, and in some parts of Europe, a spoon placed across a bowl was believed to protect the food from evil spirits. Everyday objects often picked up these little whispers of meaning. Decorative spoons also became fashionable, particularly in wealthier homes. Handles might be engraved with initials or coats of arms. A spoon might bear the emblem of a guild, or a city, or a family crest. These were not just for eating. They were declarations of identity, of belonging. Some spoons even carried tiny inscriptions, mottos, prayers, blessings. Imagine dipping into your stew with a spoon whose handle whispered, Deus vult, God wills it, or Memento Mori, remember death. The spoon became both tool and reminder, a quiet voice at every meal. And then there were spoons linked to charms and remedies. Folk healers sometimes stirred mixtures with special spoons, carved with symbols, blessed with prayers. A spoon that touched a holy relic might be thought to carry curative power. Even ordinary families might set aside a particular spoon for special foods or occasions, believing it brought luck or protection. Children's spoons had their own place too. Small, light, sometimes carved with playful shapes. A mother might carve a tiny bird at the end of a handle, or a father might smooth a spoon carefully for his child's first solid foods. In such simple acts, love was placed into wood or horn, passed into little hands. And, of course, spoons found their way into stories and humor. Medieval tales sometimes poke fun at greedy monks or foolish peasants who carried spoons too large, or at misers who locked away their silver spoons while eating with wood. The spoon could become a character in its own right, a prop in the theater of daily life. Think for a moment of a medieval household chest. Inside might be a jumble of objects, keys, coins, a rosary, a little spoon wrapped in cloth. That spoon might carry more than utility. It might be a keepsake from a wedding, a memory of a godparent, or a talisman against harm. So, spoons were never just spoons. They were, at times, tokens of love, carriers of family pride, bearers of superstition. They could be humble, they could be elaborate, but they were always close to human life. And now, as we near the end of our long wandering, let's gather these threads together to see how the many types of medieval spoons, wood, pewter, horn, silver, sacred, and symbolic, shaped the texture of daily life, and how, in their quiet way, they still whisper to us across the centuries. And so, we have wandered through every kind of medieval spoon, from the simple chip of wood, carved by hand beside the hearth, to the gleaming silver of noble tables, from the translucent horn of monasteries, to the gilded and sacred spoons held in churches, each one different, each one carrying a fragment of medieval life. It is curious, isn't it, how such a small object can reveal so much. We think of history in terms of kings and battles, castles and cathedrals. Yet sometimes, it is the smallest things that show us how people really lived. The spoon, in its quiet way, mirrors the whole of society. For the poor, the spoon was wood, soft, personal, worn down by years of porridge and pottage. For the townsfolk, pewter spoons reflected modest prosperity, respectable and durable. For the monks, horn spoons embodied simplicity and humility. For the nobles, silver spoons gleamed with wealth and status. For the church, sacred spoons transformed into symbols of faith, of blessing, of authority. And beyond all that, spoons were gifts, tokens of love, carriers of superstition, tiny vessels of memory. They could be buried in graves, given at baptisms, or locked in chests as treasures. Think of the rhythms of daily life. A farmer returns from the fields, hungry and tired, lifts his wooden spoon to his lips. A merchant's family sits in their townhouse, pewter spoons clinking softly against bowls. A monk bows his head in silence, dipping his horn spoon into simple broth. A noblewoman at a feast raises a silver spoon engraved with her family crest. And in a cathedral, a priest holds a gilded spoon, lifting not food but a sacrament. All these gestures, the same motion repeated across centuries. Lips meeting spoon, hunger meeting comfort, body meeting nourishment. And through that simple action, the spoon became part of the rhythm of life itself. When archaeologists find these spoons today, worn, bent, darkened by the soil, they are more than curiosities. They are echoes, faint whispers of meals long finished, of hands long gone. Yet in their silence, they remind us of the people who lived, who worked, who prayed, who loved. And perhaps, when you pick up a spoon in your own kitchen, you might think just for a moment of its long history, of the countless meals, countless lives, countless stories tied to this little object. The medieval spoon was never just a tool. It was a mirror, showing the place of each person in their world. And now, as we close this quiet lecture, let the thought of spoons drift in your mind, like the flicker of candlelight in a long medieval hall. Steady, gentle, fading into silence. Sleep well.